Within the lore of Warhammer 40K, we all know that the Orks are always looking for a fight. And in previous videos we've talked about how the Space Marines fighting the Orks is a classic. But in today's deep dive we're going to explore other Xeno factions, specifically 5 different factions that put up a good fight for the Greenskins. Starting with the hordes of the preemptive Tyranid invasion, the Genestealers. Now, every Evil Sun's warband is on the lookout for mechs who can offer bigger and better trucks, bikes, and buggies. The thirst for speed and chaos runs deep in their veins, and having the most stack-of-filled and speediest machines is a matter of pride. This obsession was no different for the notorious Jazgob, the legendary war boss of Jazgob's Jet Boys. His warband was infamous across the sector for their daring raids and lightning-fast assaults, all made possible by their custom vehicles, which were second to none in ferociousness and speed. Jazgob had a problem though. Despite the growing reputation of the Jet Boys, he wanted more speed, more firepower, and more destruction. That's when he caught wind of Big Mech Cogtooth, a mech boy known for his wild and sometimes dangerous ambitions. Cogtooth wasn't just another tinkerer. He had grand designs, constantly scheming for bigger and more outrageous war machines. Rumor had it, he had his sights set on capturing a Space Hulk drifting through the void, an ancient derelict known as Star Krumpa. This massive conglomeration of wrecked ships and forgotten technologies was said to be home to forgotten relics and hidden treasures. But Star Krumpa wasn't uninhabited. The monstrous Space Hulk was infested by Genestealers, vicious Xeno predators that had taken root deep in the cavernous depths of this ship. Now, most Orks would have hesitated at such a prospect, but not Jazgob. The mere thought of the loot inside was too tempting to ignore, and the promise of fast, deadly machines that could come from the looted tech aboard was enough to spur him into action. Jazgob decided to throw in his lot with Big Mech Cogtooth, knowing full well that the mech's insane genius could give him the speed and power he craves. Together, they led a massive assault on the Space Hulk. Dozens of jagged, bladed-toothed boarding craft smashed into Star Krumpa's hull like crude alien torpedoes. The Orks poured out, roaring and firing their shooters wildly, excited at the promise of a good scrap. The interior of the Space Hulk was a twisted maze of derelict ships welded together over the millennia. As soon as the Orks bursted in, the Genestealers awoke from their slumber. The creatures were nightmare incarnate, sinewed, fast, and deadly, with claws that could shred ceramite. They flooded the dark corridors, attacking from the shadows and tearing apart any Ork they could get their claws on. But the Orks weren't fazed. In fact, the tougher the fight, the more fun it was for them. Days of brutal combat followed, with the Orks rampaging through the bowels of the Space Hulk. The Genestealers put up a fierce resistance, their numbers seemingly endless. But slowly, the Orks began to gain the upper hand. For every Ork that fell, 2 more took his place, eager for a chance to prove their might. The boarding crafts became makeshift fortresses as the boys set up shop wherever they could, fortifying corridors and holding choke points with savage glee. Still, as the days stretched on, it became clear that the worst was yet to come. Deep in the heart of Star Krumpa lurked the Broodlord, the apex predator of the Genestealers and his foul nest. They noticed that the Xenos fought harder the closer the Orks got to his lair, and Jazgob knew that this final battle would be the bloodiest. Big Mech Cogtooth, always looking for a way to inspire his boys, made an irresistible offer. He promised to grant anything the Ork who brought him the Broodlord's skull would desire: a fleet of custom trucks, the fastest warbike, or even a mountain of teeth. It didn't matter. Whatever they wanted, they'd get it. The challenge electrified the warband. The Orks, driven into a frenzy by the promise of Cogtooth's reward, began to mob together, forming a massive horde as they prepared to storm the Genestealers' nest. But Jazgob had other plans. As the mob charged, him and his Jet Boys hung back, revving their warbikes, their engines snarling like feral beasts. With a guttural roar, Jazgob gave the signal, and his boys surged forward, their bikes kicking up debris as they raced past the mob, hugging the narrow corridors of the Space Hulk. It was madness, pure and simple. The walls of the Hulk blurred as the Jet Boys sped through the labyrinthian corridors, leaning hard into turns and dodging debris. Their exhaust fumes filled the air, leaving thick, choking trails of smoke in their wake. They dodged incoming attacks from the panicked Genestealers, their bikes equipped with makeshift Daka that blazed wildly as they tore through the Xeno horde. Jazgob, always leading from the front, had his eyes on the prize, the Broodlord's lair. As the horde of Genestealers swarmed forward, Jazgob cackled manically and revved his engine harder. The roar of the bike drowned out the screams of the Xenos as he plowed through their ranks. When they finally reached the nest, it was chaos incarnate. Genestealers, maddened by the defense of their broodlord, leaped from all direction. The boys fought like madmen, but it was Jazgob who found the broodlord itself. The creature loomed out of the shadows, its massive form covered with twitching, razor-sharp talons. With a bellow of fury, it lunged at the warboss. But Jazgob wasn't fazed. He met the charge head-on, his warbike's engine screaming as he slammed into the broodlord, smashing him into the rusted walls of the hulk. The impact left the beast temporarily dazed, just long enough for Jazgob to rev his bike again and ram the beast into the wall once more. The broodlord hissed in rage, but Jazgob was faster. He whipped out his slugger and unloaded it point blank into the creature's skull. The broodlord screeched as the shot scorched through his face, burning it down to a charred husk. With the broodlord dead, the remaining Genestealers scattered, leaderless and broken. The speed boss dismounted, kicking the corpse for good measure before ripping its head from its body with a victorious roar. The fight was over, but the spoils were just beginning. Returning to Cogtooth, Jazgob tossed the broodlord's skull at the mech's feet. True to his word, the mech offered him anything he wanted. Jazgob, ever the cunning warlord, didn't ask for just a few shiny new toys. He demanded an entire fleet of custom vehicles, a horde of trucks, warbikes, and buggies, each faster and deadlier than anything else in the galaxy. From that day on, Jazgob's jet boys became the terror of the stars, their souped-up machines leading nothing but wreckage and exhaust fumes in their wake. The legend of the broodlord's skull only grew, becoming a tale whispered across the galaxy by greenskins, a reminder of the Orks' brutal, unstoppable hunger for speed, violence, and victory. Genestealers are always a fun faction for the Orks to fight, but what about an ancient faction such as the Necrons? The Ork race is one of the oldest intelligent species in all of the major factions of the 40K universe. They are found all over the galaxy, and there is no indication that they will ever disappear anytime soon. While most greenskins care little about their race's history, the truth is that the Orks are one of the many psychically powerful warrior races created by an even older race known as the Old Ones. These Old Ones created the Orks for a simple purpose: to destroy their archenemy, the Necron race. The full story of this great and ancient war is detailed in the Orks' origin story, which I'll link up above, but it means that the conflict between the Orks and the Necrons is one of the oldest feuds in the entire galaxy. The Greenskins have been killing tin heads for millions of years, and the constant war only stopped because the Necrons entered their great sleep. Now that the Necrons are reawakening, the Orks, who by this point don't even remember how fun it was to kill Necrons, are eager to loot and pillage their old rivals. At first, it's easy to assume that the primitive Orks wouldn't stand a chance against the Necron race. After all, the Orks' preferred weapon of choice is usually a basic choppa, while the Necrons have gauze weaponry that could deatomize a target from a distance. And while the Necron lords might view the Greenskins as simple vermin, only a foolish overlord would underestimate the savagery of an Ork walk. If a tomb world is not large enough or not fully awakened, the rampaging Orks would easily overwhelm the Necron lair. And a tomb complex is an amazing prize for an Ork, with technology that can defy the laws of physics and enough resources to triple the size of a warboss's walker army. The Necron's home is a prized jewel for the Greenskins. Such was the motivating factor for the Ork warboss Skullcrack, who led a great walk into the desert tomb world of Fortress, on rumors that the planet was home to an ancient alien weaponry. After weeks of searching, all that the Orks had discovered was that Fortress's seas were highly acidic and that its omnipresent sand got everywhere. Yet in truth, Fortress was neither a lifeless nor an uninhabited world, as Skullcrack discovered when the first wave of Necron warriors emerged from the planet's blood-red seas. Brackish water streamed from the living metal bodies. The soulless androids strode across the obsidian sand, each marching in perfect unison with each other, except for those few circuit misfires causing involuntary twitches and stumbles. As quickly as he could, the Ork warboss Skullcrack bellowed out his orders and the Orks prepared for battle. The Necron phalanx came to an abrupt halt, they swung their gauze flare to bear, and the killing began. The first volley of energy cut deep into the disordered Orks. Skullcrack, being somewhat quicker-witted than his followers, survived by hoisting up one of the lads off his feet and using him as cover. As a second torrent of energy crackled into the Greenskins, Skullcrack threw aside his shield and roared at his boys once more. This time the call of the Wog was taken up across the length and breadth of the shoreline. Choppas flailing, the Orks hurled themselves into the storm of emerald energies.
Such a charge would have been sufficient to freeze the blood of any mortal foe, but the Necrons were not so easily shaken as creatures of flesh. 3 more volleys did the mechanical warriors fire, and dozens of greenskins fell to the black sand, but then the Orks were upon them. Skullcrack hurled himself into the Necron ranks, swinging his massive war axe in a succession of brutal alley-crunching arcs that smashed undying heads from their shoulders, crushed rib cages, and shattered limbs. Within moments, the Ork warboss stood alone in a sea of twisted metal. He roared his dominance over the foe. Yet Skullcrack's claim to victory was premature. Even as the last Necron fell, the regeneration circuits of the first triggered, drawing upon hidden power reserves into the limbs and returning the warriors to full function. Even before Skullcrack's shout had finished echoing off the cliff, the Ork warboss found himself surrounded once again by the reanimated forms of those he had just hacked apart only moments before. Such was the scene all across the shore. Again and again, the Orcs' ferocity bore Necron warriors to the ground, but again and again the fallen dragged themselves back up into the fight. Decapitated heads were reclaimed by grasping hands, and severed arms scrambled across the sand in search for sundered necrodermis bodies. As the momentum of the Orc charge faded, the Necrons began to hold their own in the bitter battle. Still acting in unison, the Necron warriors hacked at the Orcs with heavy-bladed bayonets, and unlike their opponents, the greenskins that were struck down did not rise again. Only near Skullcrack was the fight still in the Orcs' favor, for the warboss had taken to smashing his opponent into as many and as small pieces as possible to delay the inevitable reassembly. So lost was he in the joy of battle that Skullcrack didn't notice the swiftly rising tide until the waters were lapping at his feet. The dynamic of the battle had changed as the sea rose up to the beach to swallow the sands. For the first time since the fight had begun, downed Necrons were failing to regenerate, as vital components were swept out into the seething waters of the bay. Yet the rising tide also sucked at the Orcs' feet, making their footing treacherous. Worse still, those Necrons that managed to self-repair did so hidden beneath the waves, and many an Orc were dragged beneath the surface by grasping mechanical hands. Bellowing at his lads to follow, the warboss ran back to the beach as swiftly as the drag of water about his leg would allow him. There, under the shadow of the cliff face, the Orcs prepared to make their stand. The waters below were quieter now. Only a handful of Necrons were visible above the water, and then suddenly they were sucked beneath the surface. The greenskins let out a cheer, but the noise swiftly died away, as out in the bay the waters parted once more and a slab-sided monolith heaved its way to the surface. Gunfire scattering off its armored flank, the war machine glided slowly towards Skullcrack and his remaining boys. There was an ear-splitting whine. The crystal atop the monolith glowed a piercing white, and then all that was left of the Orcs was a smoldering pile of ash. Far beneath the surface of the bay in a vaulted stone chamber, 2 enthroned Necron nobles watched the holographic reaction of Skullcrack's demise. Rising, one banished the hologram with a dissatisfied wave of his metallic hand.
Combat efficiency remains at 70% of acceptable parameters. Further data is necessary to complete the required optimization.
Indeed, replied the other, also rising.
Recommend activation of Mind Shackle Scarabs XD11101. Humans will provide a suitable comparator.
The first Necron nodded to indicate his agreement and issued the necessary command.
It is done. If the subject performs as expected, we have 3 solar months to prepare.
Shortly thereafter, 3 sectors away, Tech Priest Drudak began preparation to investigate a report cache of xenotechnology. It was located in an out-of-the-way desert world known as Fortress. Now we can gather from this information that the Necrons were setting up the Orcs. They knew that the Orcs were coming and they wanted to test out new weapons on the greenskins. However, the same cannot be said for another notable encounter between the Necrons and the Orcs. When attempting to loot the ancient treasures of the Necron tomb world, Deathskull warlord Zork triggered a planetary reanimation protocol. Canoptic constructs by the thousands surrounded the greenskin invaders, but far from being intimidated, the Deathskulls were delighted. They scavenged and stole at will. The Orcs cobbled together hordes of cyborgs, Morkanauts, and ever more improbable superweapons. While using a hijacked Necron Dolmen Gate, they ferried in waves upon waves of reinforcements. By the time the Tomb World's overlord Thamtek the Magnificent awakened to take command of his legions, he did so at the sight of a mob of leering mech boys standing over his sarcophagus. The Orcs completely destroyed the Tomb World.
Now let's move on to another faction that the Orcs love to fight, the Dark Eldar.
In a galaxy plagued by war and destruction, no other race savors the pain and misery caused by constant conflict like the Dark Eldar. Compared to the swarms of Tyranids or the endless regiments of the Imperial Guard, the Dark Eldar are but a pebble to the boulder-sized armies of those other races. Yet when it comes to spreading fear, the Drukhari are a cut above all others. Their superiority is fueled by the fact that they are truly nourished and revitalized based on how much suffering they can extract from their victims. The longer an Imperial citizen can live as their flesh is being stripped from the bone, or the louder a victim's agonizing cries for help can get, the more it pleases the Dark Eldar warriors. To the Dark Eldar, the sweet fruit of horror is as pleasing as the caress of a razor blade across soft flesh. They relish breaking the bodies of their captives, but prize even more highly the crushing of their spirit. For nothing is more gratifying to a Dark Eldar than securing utter dominion over one who has resisted them. They drink in every nuance of woe until their captives plead for death, a mercy the Dark Eldar are famously slow to grant. Even this is not a release for the victims, for the foul Dark Eldar homunculi hold the power of life and death in their claws. Many captives, when too broken to provide further sport, will be rent and reshaped into undying trophies, or even grotesque items of jewelry or furniture. More than one homunculus lair has sported a moaning, twitching throne fashioned from the remains of his favorite victim. Other unfortunates are rendered down, their final fate to be consumed as elixirs or narcotics by the monstrous beings who stole their lives. A quick death is rare when facing these sadistic foes, but there has been one race that has proven to be an annoyance to the Dark Eldar, the brutish greenskins. Orks are not only one of the most resilient races in the galaxy, they instinctively search for the most brutal conflict. They are biologically designed to eagerly march towards the sounds of murder and agony. The roars of anguish coming from their own kind is but a humorous laughter to these beasts. Orkoid physique itself is so robust that it could withstand tremendous punishment. Orks feel surprisingly little pain, even for the most grievous of wounds, enabling them to fight while horrifically injured, or even for a short while after being technically dead. Orks are quite capable of being beheaded, having their heads sewn onto a different body, and surviving the experience to fight again. It is said that burning them to ash is the only way to make absolute sure that they are gone for good. It is believed by some who study these brutes that it explains the greenskins' ultra-violent sense of humor, as pain and fear means little to them. They are highly curious and amused by the reactions of their weaker foes as they hack them apart, the screams of terror contrasting with a deep throaty rumbling that on occasion could be mistaken for laughter from the orcs and their snickering brethren. The greenskin regenerative process itself is so powerful that an orc who has been hacked to bits would still attempt to kill its assailant. It is this incredible survivability that haunts the Dark Eldar. Put aside the fact that capturing a greenskin monster alive is a task even a superhuman space marine would struggle to accomplish. Once the orc is bound, its entire being is overcome with nothing but rage. No matter how deep the Drukhari tormentor cuts, no matter what kind of abuse is applied, the orc's bloodlust will overcome any other emotion. Frustration is quicker to set in the Drukhari than fear in the orc. This is why the experienced Dark Eldar Archons would much rather use greenskins as pawns in their grander schemes. The limited intelligence of an orc means that they can be easily outwitted by a clever Dark One. It is rare to see an alliance created between these two races, but it's almost always to the best interest of both races to work together for a common goal, rather than vainly fight one another. Whether it's a Corsair fleet working alongside a freebooter captain, or a witch cult dealing with a band of odd boys, betrayal is almost always guaranteed. The trick is to get as much out of the greenskins as possible before they decide to turn around and drive a choppa through a soft Drukhari skull. This lesson was learned from Archon Shrek of the Cabal of the Severed Hope, when he tried to turn the greenskin horde of Warhammer against the Tau Empire colony of Corvesa. Using hit-and-run attacks, the Dark Eldar fleet lured much of the orc force towards Corvesa, but in their arrogance, they underestimated the orcs completely. Using short-range teleporter drives, a number of Warlord Hammerfist's cruisers leapfrogged the Dark Eldar, leaving them surrounded and cut off from escape into the webway. Archon Shrek's forces fought like devils to escape the tightening ring of orc ships. However, their resistance came to an end when Hammerfist and his Mega Nob retinue teleported aboard Shrek's flagship and sliced the Archon to shreds with their roaring kill saws. Typically when the orcs and the Dark Eldar do collide, it's in the best interest of the Drukhari to to fight a tactical fight. Such was the case when the Cabal of the Poison Tongue came into conflict with a fleet of Orc freebooters stationed outside of Gragas. Lady Aurelia Malice was incensed that mere barbarian pirates would deny her will. Personally capturing a muscle-bound Orc knob, Malice instructed her Lemaean poisoners to prepare a surprise for the greenskins upon the planet. Lady Maleus's Cabal made planetfall weeks later, fighting their way to the center of the Orc capital city and impaling the barely living captive upon a half-built gargant before melting away into the night. The corpse began to shed millions of spores into the air, each of which bore a cargo of terrible wasting toxins. As the infected spores corrupted the Orcoid reproduction cycle, the population of Gragas grew weaker and weaker. When Malice returned, it was a simple matter of slaughtering the Orcs that were resilient to the poison. This wouldn't be the last time Lady Malice would encounter Orcs. Late in the 41st millennium, she learned through some harlequins that a tech priest on Vendrigus 9 had recovered an STC codename Panacea, a miracle cure that would save billions of human lives. During that time, Lady Malice was given a task by Vecht himself: poison the Imperium of Man and bring proof of the deed. This was her opportunity. Using hit-and-run raids, Malice's Cabal of the Poison Tongue lured the might of the Orc Wall down upon the heavily defended Forge World. The Orc fleet literally plowed headlong into the planet, one massive void ship after another, slamming into the world's surface to cause untold destruction. As wave upon wave of Orc disembarked from the wrecked spacecraft, the planet's surviving defenders found themselves embroiled in a desperate war for survival. Malice and her Cabal swooped into the midst of the resulting havoc, cutting down everyone who stood between them and their prize. After prying the miracle cure from the Orc Big Mac, who had stolen it before her, Malice returned to the Dark City, leaving the planet to burn in her wake. Azurael Vak was reportedly impressed with the audacious raid, allowing Malice to set the Imperium's miracle cure atop a pedestal in her personal trophy hall. She even received an invitation from Vak as a way to congratulate her. Orcs have even been known to assault Kamara itself, even though it was an accident. The Orc warlord, Zoggit, famous for killing anyone foolish enough to imply that he was a bit of a weird boy, declared a war straight into the Vermilion space rift, encroaching upon the world of Zogdis. He and his boys emerged in the Kamarite port spar of black blood, much to the surprise of the resident Cabal. The resulting storm of violence carried hundreds of thousands of Orcs into the twisting byways of Kamara. The Dark City quickly turned attention to the Orcoid invasion, systematically isolating each Orc army in order to destroy it piece by piece. However, each Cabal was preoccupied by trying to turn an unexpected invasion to their advantage. The Orcs caused far more damage than any of the Cabals thought was possible. Several districts of Kamara were toppled or burnt to cinder by waves upon waves of howling Orcs. Eventually the Orcs were corralled, and over 10,000 greenskins were captured by the Witch District, packed to capacity for almost an entire fortnight. When Orcs are captured, such as in this situation, they are perfect warriors for the bloody stage of a witch cult arena. In these gladiatorial battles, the tough and aggressive Orcs are let loose on the weaker captives, such as Tau and humans. The Drukhari crowds love to see the muscle-bound beasts pummel other slaves. Once the audience has had a fill of violence from these greenskins, a true combatant steps in to challenge an Orc. It is a sign of great pride for a witch to best an Orc in hand-to-hand combat. The Orc's raw power could easily rip apart the slender bodies of the Dark Eldar, which is why the witch must both be agile and precise with every one of its strikes. Many inexperienced warriors have underestimated the Orc endurance. Even if an Orc has been fighting all day, a sudden burst of aggression can easily catch a Dark Eldar off guard, and it will almost always prove deadly. To the amusement of some homunculi, an Orc slave can also be used to create furniture that has the potential to severely hurt a user. The indomitable nature of an Orc means that even severed limbs can still be hostile. The arm of a chair can easily be made from the fungus-like arm of an Orc, and any interaction with that body part could trigger it to claw at the unsuspecting owner. It is important to note that the Dark Eldar will always view Orcs as prey, and even in situations where the greenskins are attacking their craftworld brethren, the Drukhari will always choose to side with their own kin over an Orc. no matter what type of arrangement has been made.
Now let's take a break from all the Xenos that the Orks love to fight to take a look at the Imperium, and specifically the subhumans of the Ogryns that the Orks love to fight.
Scattered throughout the Imperial Guard regiments of the Imperium of Man are the massive, brutish abhumans known as Ogryns. These valiant but savage soldiers tower over their Imperial Guard brethren. Some are even as tall as the Adeptus Astartes warriors. Since the days of the Great Crusade, the Ogryns have been a powerful tool in the wars of humanity. When the Emperor still walked amongst man, he ordered these muscle-bound warriors conscripted into his imperial army. He saw the value of these naturally aggressive yet powerful subhumans. They were perfect for close-quarter melee combat, and with a few tweaks to Imperial heavy weapons, they proved to be deadly moving weapon platforms, showering the enemy front lines with heavy fire, followed by brutal hand-to-hand combat as they tore through whatever was left of the infantry line with feral rage. There was one major downfall to these colossal warriors. They were incredibly dumb compared to a normal human. Since their ancestors relied on brute strength over intellect to survive, the Ogryn race slowly lost much of their complex cognitive abilities during the Age of Strife. Cultural and social complexity took a major hit to the point where Ogryn colonies resembled prehistoric Terran caveman family structures rather than the highly social and connected empires of the Dark Age of technology. In these smaller family clans, not only did the toughest Ogryns rule over their people, but also the most loyal and protective members of the clan get a chance to pass on their genes, thus creating a race of abhumans that were brutally dangerous in combat, but also incredibly gentle and caring to those they allowed into their families. Their protective nature made the worlds of the Ogryns difficult to conquer during the Great Crusade. It was easy for the Imperium to control the space around an Ogryn planet, but once humanity made planetfall, it was a completely different story. Ogryn clans didn't have the mental ability to coordinate a planet-wide defensive against the Imperial army, but they did have a small amount of intelligence needed to put up a fight once the invaders were close enough to punch. Ogryn planets were radically changed after being conquered, and with the creation of the Adeptus Administratum and the formation of the Tithes Chamber Notaries, many of the homeworlds of the Ogryns became farms, where these abhumans were bred for the sole purpose of war. On these types of planets, the Ogryns were indoctrinated into the Imperial cult, and were trained to funnel their aggression towards the enemies of the Imperium. Once prepared to fight alongside the Astra Militarum, the Ogryns were recruited by waves and spread throughout the regiments of the Imperial Guard. There were certain planets that were so dangerous that the Adeptus Administratum decided to preserve these feral worlds and merely introduce the Ogryn population to the Imperial Creed, but any additional training was not needed and seen as a waste of time. One of these planets was the high-gravity steppe world of Krork. Very little was recorded by the remembrancers of the Great Crusade as to the origin of Krork. What is known is that the Imperium decided to leave the planet undisturbed and allowed its population of Ogryns to continue to live in the same manner as they did before their discovery. The savage brutes of Krork developed a highly warlike society, much more aggressive and untamed than any other Ogryn planet ever encountered. The loyalty and protective nature of most Ogryns did not seem to develop in the population of this planet. Observing the culture from afar, the Imperium was able to note that these Ogryns did not hesitate to murder members of their own clan who they perceived as being weak. There was more internal tribal warfare than there were between opposing tribes. Leaders were constantly being tested, and the only way of proving that an Ogryn should lead is by killing any rival that might even ask the question. Because of this brutality, the Imperium chose not to conscript any of these Ogryns unless they were truly desperate. If the Krork gene seed mixed with other Ogryns, out of a highly controlled setting of course, their future offspring could be uncontrollable, and the effectiveness of the race as a whole could have been jeopardized forever. When the savagery of these Ogryns is needed, an Imperial landing craft will descend upon Krork and capture several tribes, making sure to mark each recruit and taking the Ogryns to fight upon battlefields many light years away from their homes. Each Krork Ogryn must be heavily sedated while they are being transported. If the hypnotics were to wear off, the Krork Ogryns could easily rampage for hours through a ship until they are brought down. In combat, the Krork Ogryn Auxilia are terrible to behold. Very few Imperial Guard officers will ever try to teach them the relatively complex operations of a Ripper gun, partly because they don't have the patience to learn, and mostly out of fear that they will use the gun on the officer. Instead, crude but deadly close combat weapons are hastily manufactured for newly raised regiments, thus allowing the Ogryn to perform in combat as they know best. Once in battle, the Krork are almost completely uncontrollable, and so they are used sparingly, with just 1 or 2 squads being assigned to any action alongside existing Imperial Guard forces. Only twice in the history of the Imperium's use of these Ogryns has the entire Auxilia been unleashed upon an enemy. So brutal was this force that tales of the destruction of the Mkarta base during a rebel uprising spread not only through the system, but the worlds in the neighboring sector were terrified of the cruelty of these Ogryns. These monsters are fully capable of destroying huge areas of civilized land in a very short space of time with their wanton lust for destruction. In great numbers, the Krork Ogryns can easily rip apart armored vehicles and topple small buildings. Many Imperial Guard officers considered the Auxilia to be a primitive form of a doomsday weapon when used in this fashion, and so it is rarely ordered into action, as the Imperium is likely to suffer as much as its enemies. The main difficulty is always rounding them up after the battle has ceased, before the Ogryns turn their attention away from the battered enemies and start concentrating on the surrounding areas. The second time the Imperium used the entire Krork Ork Auxilia was during the Third War for Armageddon. The planet was being devastated by the largest Ork invasion since the Ullanor campaign. Desperate for aid, the Imperial Military High Command weighed out their options and decided that they would risk collateral damage. Initially, the entire force was loaded onto the transport ship, with only enough crew to land the beast on the Netheria Peninsula of Armageddon. This location was chosen because it was isolated enough that if the Krork Ogryns defeated the Orks, they would be blocked from coming onto the main continent by the massive Tempest Oceans to the north. When the cargo was disgorged, the region that was essentially a frozen wasteland became engulfed in violence as the Krork Ogryns clashed with the dreaded Orks of Godskull's Great Wall. The two barbaric forces unleashed their bloodlust, and it is said that within a few hours, the ice-covered peninsula ran red with blood of the slain. These sadistic armies tore each other apart, until the battle was no longer on the frozen ground, but instead fought on top of the Ork and Ogryn bodies. The Ogryns were successful enough to push towards the Orks' main landing site, where a massive Ork fortress crashed into the frost-covered earth. Very few reports exist on the status of the Krork Ogryn force. As was expected, the Auxilia broke all communication with the Imperial High Command as soon as the battle begun. The only information that has been gathered is that the Ogryns are still seen fighting the Orks. How many still remain is unknown. Some say the Ogryns have resorted to eating Ork flesh as a means to survive, and yet others report that Ogryns are thriving, and the Abhumans have begun to take over the Ork rocks to the south of the Imperial stronghold. Scarier reports exist of enslaved Ogryns fighting the Imperial Guard forces alongside Orks, and Ogryns being taken care of by Gretchen underlings. If this betrayal is true, this might mean the exterminatus of the planet of Krork.
And lastly, let's take a look at a faction that the Orks love to loot, the Tau Empire.
The Tau Empire is a technological marvel filled with innovation and progress. Its goal is to advance through the galaxy and enrich the planets and peoples it encounters. The Ork race is one of the galaxy's most savage and brutal forces, with the sole purpose of stomping through the galaxy to crush and pillage everything in its wake. Both forces are the Milky Way galaxy's most antithetical Xenos. The history of each race has been scarred by each other's presence, and this rivalry starts with the rise of the Tau Empire. The Tau first discovered the Orks on the planet surrounding their first major colony, Town. Signals soon arrived, reporting Ork tribes scattered across every star system they investigated. The sophisticated Tau quickly learned to pinpoint the telltale Ork signatures on their scanning equipment, and it appeared with alarming regularity that on every planet, moon, asteroid belt, and virtually anywhere that could support life, the Orks' presence was there. It took many battles before the Tau at last abandoned their futile attempt to absorb the Orks in the manner that had proven so successful with a dozen other alien civilizations. There was simply no bargaining with such creatures. The Ethereals themselves eventually conceded that these aliens were a lost cause, and amended the protocols to forego any attempt to integrate the Orks into the Tau Empire, declaring at last that the greater good was actually served by eliminating the greenskins. In their first prolonged campaign against the Orks, the Tau suffered many defeats, but were ultimately able to eradicate the greenskins, thanks in part to the Earthcast refinement of the first pulse rifle. This period of bloody war became known as the Campaign of Cleansing. Years later, in order to combat the Orks, the fortunate alliance between the Tau and the Kroot was formed. Within a decade, the Watercast had established embassies upon Pac, the capital world of the Kroot realm. As the Tau Empire continued to grow, a massive Ork fleet invaded Viorla Sapt, but it was defeated by a masterful campaign. Viorla annually passed through a gap between its two stars, a time called the Trial by Fire. It causes deadly plasma storms to ravage the planet, whose inhabitants survive by closing off protective domes around their cities. Warlord Goskrak and his fleet were lured into the storm, where they were utterly destroyed by the raging plasma radiation. Even after this tremendous defeat, the Greenskins continued to assault the Tau Empire. This time, it was the Sept world of Fjolvasha. At the time of the defense of Fjolvasha, Ethereal Anshi was already nearly 40 years of age, old for a Tau, and was looking forward to spending his last years on the Paradise Sept of Autala. A much respected life was behind him, many long years spent helping to expand the Empire into space, by providing guidance for the Tau in his care. Hailing from the hot-blooded Sept of Viorla, Anshi had perhaps a better understanding of the Firecast and their ways of war than other Ethereals. It is said that on occasion, he went as far as to join them in their battle rituals, honing his skills with the Honor Blade to a level where even a Shas Vray could not pierce his defenses. His skill with a blade had reached the level where spirit, weapon, and body had achieved complete harmony. In what was supposed to be his last assignment, Anshi led a Tau colony force to a world he named Kaltir, the newest world in the expanding Tau Empire. Infested by feral Orks, initial progress in claiming the world was slow, but under Anshi's guidance, Fire Warrior teams were soon able to push the Orks back from the main areas of Tau settlements. Within 4 years, the world was flourishing. The Fyo, or the Earthcast, built many fine towns across the main continental mass. Fjolvash was one such town, a mining outpost in the low foothills of the mineral-rich mountain range, some 400 miles to the east of the capital. On a tour of inspection of the outlying towns, Anshi and his bodyguards became trapped in Fjolvash when a horde of feral Orks surrounded the town and launched a surprise attack to capture the mine workings. The existing garrison of Fjolvash had been augmented by Anshi's Fire Warrior bodyguards, and the Orks were cut down in their hundreds. Early in the fighting, the Shavray of the Fire Warriors was beheaded, cut down by an enormous Ork knob. The loss of this heroic warrior sent a surge of panic through the ranks of the Tau warriors, and it seemed as if though their defenses would crumble. Anshi leapt in front of the knob and cut him in two with one blow of his honor blade, planting the haft of his weapon between the shore halves of the corpse. Hearted by the Ethereal's brave defiance, the Fire Warriors' line steadied, and they threw the Orks back. Again and again the Orks attacked Fjolvash, and each time, Anshi led the defenders in battle, fighting alongside his warriors and spurring them to unheard feats of valor. He dispatched stealth-armored warriors and a member of the Corps, or the Aircast, to take word to the capital, as he knew that against so many Orks, it would only be a matter of time until they were overrun. The battle raged on, the Tau defenders silhouetted by the flames of burning buildings. The Fire Warriors were fighting at the limit of courage and endurance, held together by the indomitable will of Anshi. Every time their line bent back under the Ork assault, Anshi was there, his flashing honor blade a shimmering blur of silver steel as he cut down Orks by the dozens. Anshi moved like quicksilver, dodging killing blows, twisting and weaving through the air in a graceful ballet of death. Wherever he struck, Orks died, and soon none would go near him, so fearful were they of this warrior who could not be killed. Eventually the Tau were forced to pull back to the inner perimeter of the defensive walls, which the Fyo had constructed, and there they prepared for the next assault. Anshi stood in the ranks with the surviving Fire Warriors, hoping that the Corps had managed to carry word of his situation to the capital. The Greenskins attacked again, and though the Fire Warriors slew scores of Orks with every volley, they simply could not kill enough to prevent them from reaching the walls. All through the burning heat of the day, Orks charged the defensive walls, the mound of dead before it growing every second as the fire warriors killed with grim efficiency. The walls were beginning to give in place, and the Orks poured through these gaps whenever they appeared, swamping Tau battlesuits and dragging them to the ground. Each time the Orks formed a wedge within a breach, An-Shi led a counterattack to hurl them from the compound. As dusk approached, less than 50 fire warriors remained alive, and both forces sensed that the end was near. As the Orks massed for the final attack, An-Shi ordered a retreat into the barricade shrine at the town center, knowing that there were too few of them to hold the full length of the wall. The fire warriors readied their last clip of ammunition, while the workers of the field cast took up their picks and shovels, ready to fight in hand-to-hand combat. With a roar of pure hatred, the Orks swarmed over the wall and into the compound, burning and destroying everything in their path. Fire warriors shot from prepared loopholes, thinning the first wave of Orks, but unable to prevent it from reaching the building. Orks set about the door to the shrine with giant axes, climbing the walls to smash through the roof and screaming their bestial war cries. The first Orks to enter the shrine were killed swiftly, but there were always more pushing their way inside. An-Shi fought at the shrine doors as they were finally ripped from their frame. Together with the last of his fire warriors, An-Shi stood ready to fight, his honor blade cleaving the air before him in long sweeping slashes. If they were to die, then they would die together. Suddenly, the Orks were thrown into silhouettes as a series of rippling detonations exploded behind them. Sweeping through the flames came the bulky form of dozens of devilfish troop carriers, guns chattering with deadly firepower as team after team of fire warriors poured from their interiors. Alerted by the core, the full wrath of the Tau now fell upon the Orks' rear. Lumbering broadside battlesuits sprayed the Orks with plasma fire, cutting them down in droves as hammerhead tanks blasted huge holes in the Ork mobs. Within the hour, the Orks were either dead or fleeing, and the leaders of the recently arrived fire warrior cadre found An-Shi still standing at the shrine doors, his honor blade slicked with Ork blood, a handful of his bodyguards left alive. Despite the terrible casualties, the defense of Fjolvash was hailed as a great victory. The ethereal shrine still stood, and the mine workings were still in the Tau hands. The survivors of the siege hailed An-Shi as a hero, the fire warriors pledging to serve him for the rest of their lives. News of the victory soon reached the ethereals on Tau, and rather than allow An-Shi to spend his remaining years on Altala, it was decreed that he lead fresh expeditions to expand the Tau Empire. There would be no peaceful retirement for An-Shi. In another part of the Empire, a decade-long war in which a populous Tau colony was besieged by a resurgent Ork horde. It was especially notable for the rise of the exemplary pure-type protege named Commander Farsight, who swiftly followed in his master's footsteps to become a vaunted hero of the Tau Empire, and a key element of the High Council's campaigns of propaganda. Future events would cause a schism between Commander Farsight and the Tau Empire. That is until an Ork invasion under Warlord Grok advanced into the Tau Empire. The populated Tau world of Atari Vo bore the brunt of the attack, before the Orks were finally defeated by the combined forces of Dalith Sept and, the surprise to many, Commander Farsight and his separatists. The Orks were defeated, but unfortunately not eradicated, which led to the Great War of Confederation. Led by the Vjorla, many Septs combined to hold off the single largest Ork wall to have ever penetrated the Tau Empire. This campaign was also notable for the brilliant tactics and battle records of Shazo, recently awoken from stasis, who then earned the name Shadow Sun. Centuries after this tremendous campaign, a colossal Ork gargant terrorized the cities of Hulan. Its black iron armor seemed impervious to even the most intense pulse fire and missile bombardments, and its formidable array of solid-shot cannons and projectile launchers annihilated entire Firecast cadres in mere minutes. The sadistic laughter of its Ork pilots boomed out of its gargant's enormous Vox arrays as it crushed entire buildings to rubble with each swing of its great metal arms. Swarms of greenskins followed in the wake of this behemoth, bellowing praise to the Ork gods of war. Only the Vorkon Earthcast scientist, Tulan, and his experimental weapons division stand in the way of this monstrosity. Tulan ordered the deployment of 6 KV-128 Storm Surge weapon platforms, each armed with multi-phase locked pulse arc cannons, a new refinement of these devastating devices. Even though these were enormous storm surge ballistic suits, they were dwarfed by the sheer size of the Ork Gargant. But when they fired their arc cannon simultaneously, the beams converged, melding into an array of destructive energy as wide as a star scraper. This battering ram of pure annihilation burns through the Gargant's metal torso, setting off a chain reaction of detonations that tore the massive construct apart. And with that, Tulan marked the first field test of his new technology as an impressive success, though the power of the channeled plasma energy entirely immolated 3 of the 6 Storm Surge platforms. In another notable campaign against the Orks, known as the Blooding, elite city-fighting cadres from Sacia were sent to reclaim the colony of Olmi from an Ork infestation. Advancing street by street, the breacher teams utilized airburst marker light flares and overwhelming aerial support to identify and destroy the largest congregation of greenskins. So brutal was the close quarter fighting that the Seps Firecast referred to this campaign as Mont Yern, the Blooding. The survivors of the war were held in the highest regard. Although the Tau's unity has proven effective against the Orks, there have been many Ork warlords that have bested the technologically cohesive Tau Empire. In the Tau Sep world of Kelishan, the Earthcast engineers proudly reveal an immense new colony speeding craft. This monolithic spacefaring vessel is named in the Tau language as Hope's Light. On its maiden voyage, and with over 300,000 Tau colonists and warriors on board, Hope's Light is boarded by the Ork fleet of Megaboss Mork Rog and lost with all hands. For the next decade, the Kelishan Sept faces brutal raids from Mork Rog's vast new looted warship, Tau Killa. After a temporary parley with Badrock's freebooters in the Trugrot system, Warlord Nazdrak turns his war towards the Farside Enclaves. The mighty Bad Moon's war leader has heard the tales of the War of Daka, and is dead set on proving that his lads are far shootier than some shitty bunch of pirate gits. Besides which, Nazdrak has now heard of the Storm Surge artillery walkers, and is intent on building one into a Stampa. Soon enough, Commander Farsight and his Tau followers find their worlds beset by a fresh new peril. Ork warlords, fighting against the newly established empire of the Tau, have often found themselves sorely outgunned. This has always been irritating to the Ork forces involved, and sometimes even resulted in greenskin retreats, the warlords muttering to themselves that the Tau have no idea how to fight proper. One exception is Walgrog, a crusade of vengeance that extended deep into the territory of the renegade Tau commander Farsight. Grog Ironteeth, the war chief of Alsanta, had become one of the Tau Empire's most deadly foes. His fleet engaged the Kroot war spheres, drifting through the space lanes of Daleth. Grog had found that the Kroot made excellent opponents. They were mercenary aliens who preferred to engage at close quarters, and they could be relied upon to provide a vicious brawl upon which the Orks thrive. Just as the two races were settling in for a protracted campaign of head-bashing, the Tau came to aid their Kroot allies. Grog was furious. He declared war upon the Tau, determined to show them that the Orks were not to be trifled with. Unfortunately, the war chief's initial invasion of the Tau Sept world did not go according to plans. His armies were outclassed and outgunned again and again. Though he had an entire empire of Orks to throw into battle, he found that their numbers were being whittled away with worrying speed. Grog decided to take a different tactic, enlisting the help of as many tank busters, flash kits, and freebooters as he could, including the mercenary Captain Badrock. With this upgrade to his arsenal, he prepared to battle once more. Grog encountered even fiercer resistance as he penetrated the Farside enclaves in the north of the Tau Empire, but this time he was more than ready. Ludas, carrying crackling death guns converted from captured Tau weaponry, exchanged lethal volleys of fire with the Tau gun lines. Battle wagons and looted hammerhead tanks pounded the mass ranks of the Tau fire warriors with heavy munition, as Grog and his boys stomped towards the enemy gun lines. Deathcopters corkscrewed through the skies in aerial battles with battlesuit teams, preventing them from disengaging. Most impressive of all, Captain Badrock and his flash kits lit up the night, annihilating team after team of desperate Tau warriors with their snaz guns. The carnage was only stopped by the arrival of a Manta missile destroyer, which mercilessly cut down the flash kits in a volley of railgun fire. Badly wounded and out of cigars, the captain was forced to retreat. It is rumored that Badrock pursues the great and graceful ship to this day, hell-bent on revenge. Perhaps if the Tau had adhered to their usual hit-and-run tactics, they would still have carried the day, but Commander Farsight was known for his aggression and martial pride. The bloodiest battle was yet to come. As the battle of the northern enclaves escalated, Groggs embarked upon perhaps the most cunning plan yet. Central to the plan was the concept of retreat, a tactic all but unheard of in Ork culture. If it weren't for the large number of Blood Axe war bosses in Grog's employ, he would have never carried it off. As the forces of Commander Farsight pressed forward, the Ork front line fell back, hooting and hollering and clutching their heads. The Tau forces, caught in the thrill of the hunt, overextended themselves. Suddenly, the remainder of the Ork forces ambushed them from either side, closing up the Tau hunter cadres like a pair of giant green jaws. The Tau High Command were shocked to the core. Their forces had been outmaneuvered and trapped by the brutish alien invaders. They scrambled reinforcements to evacuate Commander Farsight, but Grog's war machine was too vicious. The war chief and his boys pursued the retreating Tau back to their base, burning it to the ground and looting as many Tau weapons as they could. With every bit of Deca they found, Grog's boys became more of a threat, and soon they were tooled up with more highly powered weaponry than even the greediest flash kits could wish for. The tide had turned, and it was now likely to turn back. Since that day, many more warbands have flocked to the war chief's banner. Grog has taken 3 Sept-worlds in the space of a year, locked in a war of attrition that the Orks can afford, but the Tau cannot. No matter how many times Farsight and his cadre cut down the Orks, more follow close behind, as new armies of the Greenskins make their slow but deadly approach. This is the nature of the Greenskin culture. Once word spreads of a good fight, peace becomes a distant memory. So it is that the Tau Sept-worlds are constantly embattled by the Greenskins of the Eastern Fringe. Their fight for expansion, now a simple war for survival.
Now those are just 5 factions that the Orks love to fight. More videos like this to come. If you guys have any suggestions, let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit the like button. If you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon, link in the description, and we'll talk tomorrow. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.
Oh, I used to put my freedom first in